Hello, 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 hello. It is me, Salty, and welcome to my stream, where I read. Settle down, get relaxed, and tonight we're going to be continuing with Grass for His Pillow, which is a pretty good book actually. I'd just like to say hello to all the viewers and VOD watchers, and I hope you're all having a pleasant time. So, nothing really new in my world, I don't think. Just did some more cleaning of Granddad's shed today. And I wore a mask because that shed's been there for like 60 years and God knows what dust, what arsenic, asbestos dust is in that place. Alright, I'm a little bit excited about this book. This next chapter I'm going to be reading. I had a quick peek, and it looks like a chapter just long enough for a 2-hour stream, and I hope it's going to involve a bit of action. So yeah. This is Grass for His Pillow, Chapter 7. There we go. Yes. So yesterday, Takeo went back to Shigeru's old house, where he met his old teacher, Ichiro, and Ichiro begged him to basically leave the tribe and come back and take up his inheritance, saying that the tribe have basically decided to kill you. They got what they wanted from you, and you swore an oath to us, the Autori, first before you went with the tribe. So he's basically saying, come back. And Takeo he said, yeah, basically, because the tribe was basically just going to have him doing their work, killing people. So yes, and I think he made the right choice, to be honest. Okay, Chapter 7. I left the house the same way I had come, out through the upstairs window, down the wall, and across the nightingale floor. He said the thing. That was the name of the first book, Across the Nightingale Floor. It slept under my feet, but I vowed next time I walked on it, I would make it sing. I did not scale the wall back into the street. Instead, I ran silently through the garden, went invisible, and clinging like a spider to the stones, climbed through the opening where the stream flowed into the river. I dropped into the nearest boat, untied it, took up the oar that lay in the stern, and pushed off into the river. The boat groaned slightly under my weight, and the current lapped more strongly at it. To my dismay, the sky had cleared. It was much colder, and under the 3/4 moon, much brighter. I heard the thud of feet from the bank, sent my image back to the wall, and crouched low in the boat. But Takeo was not deceived by my second self. He leapt from the wall as if he knew He leapt from the wall as if he were flying. I went invisible again, even though I knew it was probably useless against him, bounded from my boat, and flew low across the surface of the water into another of the boats that lay against the river wall. I scrabbled to undo its rope and pushed off with its oar. I saw Takeo land and steady himself against the rocking of the craft. Then he sprang and flew again as I split myself, left the second self in one boat and leapt for the other. I felt the air shift as we passed each other. Controlling my fall, I dropped into my first boat, took up the oar and began to scull faster than I ever had in my life. My second self faded as Takeo grasped it, and I saw him prepare to leap again. There was no escape, unless I went into the river. I drew my knife, and as he landed, stabbed at him with one hand. He moved with his usual speed and ducked easily under the knife. I had anticipated his move and caught him on the side with the head with the oar. He fell, stunned for a moment, while I, thrown off balance by the violent rocking of the boat, narrowly escaped tumbling overboard. I like the way that sentence worked out. You don't know what's about to happen until just the end of the sentence. Narrowly escaped tumbling overboard. I dropped the oar and clung to the wooden side. I did not want to go into the freezing water unless I took him with me and drowned him. As I slid to the other side of the boat, Takeo recovered. He leapt straight upwards and came down on top of me. We fell together, and he seized me by the throat. I was still invisible, but helpless, pinned under him like a carp on the cook's slab. I felt my vision blacken. Then he loosened his grip slightly. "You traitor," he said. "Kenji warned us you would go back to the Otori in the end. I'm glad you did, because I've wanted you dead since the first time we met. You're going to pay now, for your insolence to the Kikuta, for my hand, and for Yuki." "Kill me," I said, "as your family killed my father. You will never escape our ghosts. You'll be cursed and haunted till the day you die. You murdered your own kin." The boat moved beneath us, drifting with the tide. If Takeo had used his hands or knife then, I would not be telling this story. But he couldn't resist one last taunt. "Your child will be mine. I'll bring him up properly as a real Kikuta." He shook me violently. "Show me your face," he snarled. "I want to see your look when I tell you how I'll teach him to hate your memory. I want to watch you die." He leaned closer, his eyes searching for my face. The boat drifted into the path of the moon. As I saw its brightness, I let visibility return and looked straight into his eyes. I saw what I wanted to find, the jealous hatred of me that clouded his judgment and weakened him. He realized in a split second and tried to wrench his gaze away, but the blow from the oar must have slowed his usual quickness, and it was too late. He was already made dizzy by the encroaching Kikuta sleep. He slumped sideways, his eyelids flickering erratically as he fought it. The boat tipped and rocked. His own weight took him headfirst into the river. The boat drifted on, faster now, carried by the swelling tide. In the moonlit road across the water, I saw the body surface. It floated gently. I was not going to go back and finish him off. I hoped he'd drown or freeze to death, but I left it to fate. I took up the oar and sculled the boat to the further shore. By the time I got there, I was shivering with cold. The first roosters were crowing, and the moon was low in the sky. The grass on the bank was stiff with frost, and stones and twigs gleamed white. I disturbed a sleeping heron, and wondered if it was the one that came to fish in Shigeru's garden. It flew off from the highest branches of the willow, with the familiar clack of wings. I was exhausted, but far too wrought up to think of sleep, and anyway, I had to keep moving to warm myself. I forced myself to a quick pace, following the narrow mountain road towards the southeast. The moon was bright, and I knew the track. By daybreak, I was over the first pass and on my way down to a small village. Hardly anyone was stirring, but an old woman was blowing up the embers in her hearth, and she heated some soup for me in return for one of the coins. I complained to her about my senile old master sending me off on a wild goose chase through the mountains to a remote temple. The winter would undoubtedly finish him off, and I'd be stranded there. She cackled and said, You'll have to become a monk then." "Not me. I like women too much." This pleased her, and she found some freshly pickled plums to add to my breakfast. When she saw my string of coins, she wanted to give me lodging as well as food. Eating had brought the sleep demon closer, and I longed to lie down, but I was too afraid of being recognized, and I already regretted I had said as much as I had to her. I might have left Takeo in the river, but I knew how the river gives up its victims, both the living and the dead, and I feared his pursuit. I was not proud of my defection from the tribe after I had sworn to obey them, and in the cold light of morning I was beginning to realize what the rest of my life would be like. I had made my choice to return to the Otori, but now I would never be free from the dread of assassination. An entire secret organization would be drawn up against me to punish me for my disloyalty. To slip through their web, I had to move faster than any of their messengers would, and I had to get to Terayama before it began to snow. The sky had turned the color of lead when I reached Suwano on the afternoon of the second day. My thoughts were all of my meeting there with Keide and the sword training session when I had fallen in love with her. Was her name already entered in the ledgers of the dead? Would I have to light candles for her now every year at the Festival of the Dead until I died? Would we be joined in the afterworld, or were we condemned never to meet again, either in life or in death? Grief and shame gnawed at me. She had said, "I only feel safe with you," and I had abandoned her. If fate were to be kind, and she were to come into my hands again, I would never let her go. I regretted, bitterly, my decision to go with the tribe, and I went over the reasons behind my choice many times. I believed I had made a bargain with them, and my life was forfeit to them. That was one thing. But beyond that, I blamed my own vanity. I had wanted to know and develop the side of my character that came from my father, from the Kikuta, from the tribe. The dark inheritance that gave me skills I was proud of. I had responded eagerly and willingly to their seduction, the mixture of flattery, understanding, and brutality with which they had used and manipulated me. I wondered how much chance I had to get away from them. My thoughts went round and round in circles. I was walking in a kind of daze. I'd slept a little in the middle of the day, in a hollow off the side of the road, but the cold woke me. The only way to stay warm was to keep walking. I skirted the town and, descending through the pass, picked up the road again near the river. The current had subsided from the full flood caused by the storms that had delayed us in Suwano, and the banks had been mended, but the bridge here, a wooden one, was still in ruins. I paid a boatman to take me across. No one else was travelling so late. I was his last customer. I felt he was eyeing me curiously, but he did not speak to me. I could not place him as tribe, but he made me uneasy. He dropped me on the other side, and I walked quickly away. When I turned at the corner of the road, he was still watching me. I made a movement with my head, but he did not acknowledge it. It was colder than ever, the air dank and icy. I was already regretting that I had not found shelter for the night. If I was caught by a blizzard before the next town, I stood little chance of surviving. Yamagata was still several days away. There would be a post station at the fief border, but, despite Ichiro's letter and my disguise as a servant, I did not want to spend the night there too. I did not want to spend the night there. Too many curious people, too many guards. I didn't know what to do, so I kept walking. Night fell. Goodness. There we go. Night fell. Even with my tribe-trained eyes, it was hard to see the road. Twice I wandered off it and had to retrace my steps. Once I stumbled into some sort of hole or ditch with water at the bottom, soaking my legs up to the knees. The wind howled and strange sounds came from the woods, reminding me of legends of monsters and goblins, and making me think the dead walked behind me. By the time the sky began to pale in the east, I was frozen to the bone and shivering uncontrollably. I was glad to see the dawn, but it gave no relief from the bitter cold. Instead, it just brought home, to me, how alone I was. For the first time, the idea crept insidiously into my head that if the fief border was manned by Arai's men, I would give myself up to them. They would take me to Arai, but first they would surely give me something hot to drink. They would sit me down inside by a fire and make tea for me. I became obsessed by the thought of that tea. I could feel the heat of the steam on my face, the warmth of the bowl in my hands. I was so obsessed by it that I did not notice someone walking behind me. I was aware, suddenly, of a presence at my back. I turned, astonished that I had not heard the footfall on the road, had not even heard breathing. I was amazed, even frightened at my apparent loss of hearing. It was as though this traveller had fallen from the sky or walked above the ground as the dead do. Then I knew that either exhaustion had unhinged my mind, or I was indeed seeing a ghost, for the man walking just behind me was the outcast, Joanne, who I thought had been tortured to death by Arise men in Yamagata. So great was the shock I thought I would faint. The blood rushed from my head, making me stagger. Joanne grabbed me as I fell, his hands seeming real enough, strong and solid, smelling of the tannery. How the hell did he escape? And who was tortured? If it wasn't him. Earth and sky turned around me, and black spots darkened my sight. He lowered me to the ground and pushed my head between my knees. Something was roaring in my ears, deafening me. I crouched like that, his hands holding my head until the roaring lessened and the dark receded from my vision. I stared at the ground. The grass was rimmed by frost, and tiny particles of black ice lay between each stone. The wind howled in the cedars. Apart from that, the only sound was my teeth chattering. Where's Seribot? Joanne spoke. There was no doubt it was his voice. Forgive me, Lord. I startled you. I didn't mean to alarm you. They told me you were dead. I didn't know if you were a living being or a ghost. Well, I might have died for a while, he whispered. Arise men thought so and threw my body out in the marshland. But the secret God had other plans for me and sent me back to this world. My work here is not yet done. I lifted my head carefully and looked at him. He had a new scar, not long healed, from nose to ear, and several teeth missing. I took his wrist and brought his hand round so I could see it. The nails were gone, the fingers clubbed and twisted. I should be asking your forgiveness, I said, sickened. Nothing happens to us that is not planned by God, he replied. I wondered why any God's plans had to include torture, but I did not say this to Joanne. Instead, I asked, How did you find me? The boatman came to me and told me he had ferried someone he thought was you across the river. I've been waiting for word of you. I knew you would come back. He took up the bundle he'd placed by the side of the road and began to untie it. The prophecy has to be fulfilled after all. What prophecy? I remembered that Kenji's wife had called him the lunatic. He didn't answer. He took 2 small millet cakes from the cloth, prayed over them, and gave one to me. You're always feeding me, I said. I don't think I can eat. Drink then, Joanne said, and handed me a rough bamboo flask. I wasn't sure about drinking either, but I thought it might warm me. As soon as the liquor hit my stomach, the darkness came roaring back, and I vomited several times so hard I was racked by violent shuddering. Joanne clicked his tongue as you would to a horse or an ox. He had the patient touch of a man used to dealing with animals, though of course he dealt with them at the moment of their death and then, afterwards, flayed their corpses. When I could speak again, I said through chattering teeth, I must keep moving. Where are you heading? He asked. Terayama. I'll spend the winter there. Well, he said, and fell into one of his familiar silences. He was praying, listening to some inner voice that would tell him what to do. "It's good," he said finally. "We'll go over the mountain. If you go by road, they'll stop you at the barrier. And anyway, it will take too long. It will snow before you get to Yamagata." "Over the mountain?" I looked up at the jagged peaks that stretched away to the northeast. The road from Suwano to Yamagata skirted around their foot, but Teriyama itself lay directly behind them. Around the range, the clouds hung low and grey, with dull damp sheen that presages snow. Presages. It's very cool. I like that word. "It's a steep climb," Joanne said. "You must rest a little before you attempt it." I began to think about getting to my feet. "I don't have time. I must get to the temple before it snows." Joanne looked up at the sky and sniffed the wind. "It will be too cold to snow tonight, but it could well start tomorrow. We'll ask the secret one to hold it back." He stood and helped me up. "Can you walk now? It's not far back to the place I live. You can rest there. Then I'll take you to the men who will show you the way over the mountain." I felt faint, as though my body had lost its substance, almost as though I'd split myself and somehow gone with my image. I was thankful for the tribe training that had taught me to find those reserves of strength of which most men are unaware. Slowly, as I concentrated on my breathing, I felt some energy and toughness return. Joanne no doubt attributed my recovery to the power of his prayers. He regarded me for a moment with his deep-sunk eyes, then turned with a flicker of a smile, and began to walk back the way we had come. I hesitated for a moment, partly because I hated the thought of retracing my steps, losing the ground it had cost me so much to cover, but also because I recoiled from going with the outcast. It was one thing to talk with him at night, alone, quite another to walk close to him, to be seen in his company. I reminded myself that I was not yet an Autori lord, and no longer one of the tribe, that Joanne was offering me help and shelter, but my skin crawled as I followed him. After walking for less than an hour, we turned off the road onto a smaller path that followed the banks of a narrow river, through a couple of miserable villages. Children ran out to beg for food, but they backed away when they recognized the outcast. In the second village, 2 older boys were bold enough to throw stones. One of them nearly struck me on the back. I heard it coming in time to step aside, and I was going to go back and punish the brat, but Joanne restrained me. He must have been... I don't know how he didn't hear Joanne walking up behind him. Man, he must have been really cold. Long before we reached it, I could smell the tannery. The river widened and eventually flowed into the main channel. At the confluence stood the rows of wooden frames, skins stretched on them. Here in this damp, sheltered spot, they were protected from frost, but as winter's bite strengthened, they would be taken down and stored till spring. Men were already at work, all outcasts, of course, half naked despite the cold, all as skeletally thin as Joanne, and with the same beaten look like mistreated dogs. Mist hung on the river, mingled with smoke from charcoal fires. A floating bridge, made of reeds and bamboo lashed together with cords, had been constructed across the river. I remembered Joanne telling me to come to the Outcasts' bridge if I ever needed help. Now, some fate had brought me here. He would say the power of the secret god, no doubt. On the far side of the frames, a few small wooden huts had been erected. They looked as if one strong wind would flatten them. As I followed Joanne to the threshold of the nearest one, the men continued their work, but I was aware of their gaze. Each one looked at me with a kind of intense entreaty, as though I meant something to them and could help them in some way. Trying to mask my reluctance, I stepped inside, not needing to remove my shoes as the floor was earthen. A small fire burned in the hearth. The air was thick with smoke, making my eyes sting. There was one other person inside, huddled in the corner, under a pile of hides. I thought it was Joanne's wife, until he came forward on his knees and bowed his head to the dirt before me. It was the man who had ferried me across the river. He walked most of the night to tell me he'd seen you, Joanne said apologetically. He needed to rest a little before returning. I was aware of the sacrifice it entailed, not only the lonely walk through the goblin-haunted darkness, but the danger from robbers and patrols and the loss of a day's fees. Why did he do this for me? The boatman sat up then, raising his eyes and looking briefly at me. He said nothing, but the look he gave me was the same one I'd seen in the gaze of the tannery workers, a look of passion and hunger. I had seen it before, months earlier, on the faces of people as we rode back from Terayama to Yamagata, the look they threw out like an appeal to Shigeru. They had found in Shigeru the promise of something, justice, compassion, and now these men looked for the same thing in me. Whatever Joanne had told them about me had transformed me into their hope. And something in me responded to this, just as it had to the villagers, to the farmers with their hidden fields. They were treated like dogs, beaten and starved, but I saw them as men, with the brains and the hearts of men, no less than any warrior or merchant. I had been brought up among people like them, and had been taught that the secret God saw them all with equal eyes. No matter what I became, no matter what other teaching I received from the Autori or the tribe, despite my own reluctance even, it was impossible for me to forget this. Joanne said, "He is your man now, as I am, as we all are. You only have to call on us." He grinned, his broken teeth flashing in the dim light. He had made tea and handed me a small wooden bowl. I felt the steam rise against my face. The tea was made from twigs, such as we used to drink in Mino. Why should I call on you? What I'm going to need is an army. I drank and felt the warmth begin to spread through me. Yes, an army, Joanne replied. Many battles lie ahead of you. The prophecy says it. How can you help me then? It's forbidden for you to kill. Warriors will kill, Joanne replied, but there are many things they won't do, which are equally necessary, things they consider beneath them. Building, slaughtering, burying. You'll realize it when you need us. The tea settled my stomach. Joanne brought out 2 more small millet balls, but I had no appetite and made the boatman eat my share. Joanne did not eat either, but put the second ball away again. I saw the other man's eyes follow it, and gave him some coins before he left. He did not want to take them, but I pressed them into his hand. Joanne mumbled the blessing of departure over him, and then pulled aside the hides so I could take his place under them. The warmth of the tea stayed with me. The hides stank, but they kept out the cold and muffled sound. I thought briefly how any one of those starving men might betray me for a bowl of soup, but I had no alternative now. I had to trust Joanne. I let the darkness fall over me and take me down into sleep. He woke me a few hours later. It was well afternoon. He gave me tea, hardly more than hot water, and apologized for having no food to offer me. "We should leave now," he said, "if we are to get the charcoal burners before dark. If we are to get to the charcoal burners before dark." "The charcoal burners?" I usually woke swiftly, but this day I was groggy with sleep. "They are still on the mountain. They have paths they use through the forest that will take you over the border. But they will leave with the first snow." He paused for a moment and then said, "We have to speak to someone on the way." "Who?" "It won't take long." He gave me one of his slight smiles. We went outside, and I knelt by the riverbank and splashed water on my face. It was icy. As Joanne had predicted, the temperature had dropped and the air was drier. It was too cold and too dry to snow. I shook the water from my hands while he spoke to the men. Their eyes flickered towards me. When we left, they stopped work and knelt with bowed heads as I walked past. "They know who I am?" I asked Joanne in a low voice. Again I feared betrayal from these men who had so little. "They know you are Otori Takeo," he replied, "the angel of Yamagata, who will bring justice and peace. That's what the prophecy says." "What prophecy?" I asked again. He said, "You will hear it for yourself." I was filled with misgivings. What was I doing entrusting my life to this lunatic? I felt every extra moment wasted would keep me from reaching Terayama before either the snow or the tribe caught up with me. But I realized now that my only hope was to go over the mountain. I had to follow Joanne. We crossed the smaller river a little way upstream by a fish weir. We passed few people, a couple of fishermen, and some girls taking food to the men who were burning rice stalks and spreading dung on the empty fields. The girls climbed up the bank rather than cross our path, and one of the fishermen spat at us. The other cursed Joanne for blighting the water. I kept my head low and my face averted, but they paid no attention to me. In fact, they avoided looking at us directly, as though even that contact would bring pollution and bad luck. Joanne seemed to take no notice of the hostility, retreating into himself as if into a dark cloak. But when we had passed them, he said, "They would not allow us to use the wooden bridge to take the hides across. That's why we had to learn to build our own. Now the other bridge is destroyed, but they still refuse to use ours." He shook his head and whispered, "If only they knew the secret one." I think there's a lesson for us all, eh? About, pride. On the further bank, we followed the river for another mile, and then turned off towards the northeast, and began to climb. The bare-branched maples and beeches gave way to pines and cedars. As the forest deepened, the path darkened and grew steeper and steeper until we were clambering over rocks and boulders, going as often on all fours as upright. The sleep had refreshed me, and I could feel strength returning. Joanne climbed tirelessly, hardly even panting. It was hard to guess his age. Poverty and suffering had hollowed him out, so he looked like an old man, but he might have been no more than 30. There was something unearthly about him, as though he had indeed returned from the dead. We finally came over a crest and stood on a small plateau. A huge rock lay across it, fallen from the crag above. Below us I could see the glint of the river, almost as far as Suwano. Smoke and mist drifted across the valley. The clouds were low, hiding the mountain range on the opposite side. The climb had warmed us, even made us sweat. But when we stopped, our breath came white on the raw air. A few late berries still glowed red on the leafless bushes, otherwise there was no colour anywhere. Even the evergreen trees were muted almost to black. Hello, Pixie. Hope you're having a nice morning. I could hear water trickling, and 2 crows were calling to each other from the crag. Arr, arr. When they fell silent, I heard someone breathing. The sound came, slow and measured, from the rock itself. I slowed my own breathing, touched Joanne on the arm, and made a gesture with my head towards it. He gave me a smile and spoke quietly. "It's all right. This is who we have come to see." The crows cawed again, their voices harsh and ominous. I began to shiver. The cold was creeping up on me, surrounding me. The fears of the previous night threatened to surface again. I wanted to keep moving. I did not want to meet whoever was concealed behind the rock, breathing so slowly they could hardly be human. "Come," Joanne said, and I followed him round the edge of the rock, keeping my eyes away from the drop below. Behind, a cave was hollowed out of the side of the mountain. Water dripped from its roof. Over the centuries, it had formed spears and columns and worn out a channel on the ground that led to a small deep pool, its sides as regular as a cistern and limestone white. The water itself was black. The roof of the cave sloped, following the shape of the mountain, and in the upper, drier side sat a figure that I would have thought was a statue if I had not heard its breathing. It was greyish-white, like the limestone, as though it had sat there so long it had started to calcify. It was hard to tell if it was male or female. I recognized it as one of those ancient people, a hermit, monk, or nun, who had gone beyond sex and gender, and grown so close to the next world, he or she was almost pure spirit. The hair fell like a white shawl. The face and hands were grey like old paper. The figure sat in meditation on the floor of the cave, with no sign of strain or discomfort. In front of it was a kind of stone altar, bearing fading flowers, the last of the autumn lilies, and other offerings. 2 bitter oranges, their skins wrinkling, a small piece of fabric, and some coins of little value. It was like any other shrine to the god of the mountain, except carved into the stone was the sign the hidden use, the one Lady Maruyama had traced on my hand in Shigawa so long ago. Joanne untied his cloth and took out the last millet cake. He knelt and placed it carefully on the altar, then bowed his head to the ground. The figure opened its eyes and gazed on us, gazed but did not see. The eyes were clouded with blindness. An expression came over the face that made me drop to my knees and bow before it. A look of profound tenderness and compassion, blended with complete knowledge. I had no doubt I was in the presence of a holy being. "Tomasu," it said, and I thought its voice a woman's rather than a man's. It was so long since anyone had called me by the water name my mother gave me that the hair on the back of my neck stood up, and when I shivered, it was not only from cold. "Sit up," she said. "I have words to say to you. I have words to say that you are to hear. You are Tomasu of Mino, but you have become both Otori and Kikuta. 3 bloods are mixed in you. You were born into the hidden, but your life has been brought into the open and is no longer your own. Earth will deliver what heaven desires." She fell silent. The minutes passed. The cold entered my bones. I wondered if she would say anything else. At first I was amazed that she knew who I was. Then I thought Joanne must have told her about me. If this was the prophecy, it was so obscure that it meant nothing to me. If I knelt there much longer, I thought I would freeze to death, but I was held by the force of the blind woman's eyes. I listened to the breath of the 3 of us and to the sounds of the mountain. The crows still cawing in their harsh voices, the cedars restless in the northeast wind, the trickle and drip of water, the groaning of the mountain itself as the temperature dropped and the rocks shrank. "Your lands will stretch from sea to sea," she said finally, "but peace comes at the price of bloodshed. 5 battles will buy you peace, 4 to win and 1 to lose. Many must die, but you yourself are safe from death, except at the hands of your own son." Another long silence followed. With every second, the light darkened towards evening, and the air chilled. My gaze wandered around the cave. At the holy woman's side stood a prayer wheel on a small wooden block carved with lotus leaves around its edge. I was puzzled. I knew many mountain shrines were forbidden to women, and none I had ever seen had contained such a mixture of symbols, as though the secret god, the enlightened one, and the spirits of the mountain all dwelt here together. She spoke as if she saw my thoughts. Her voice held a kind of laughter mixed with wonder. "It is all one. Keep this in your heart. It is all one." She touched the prayer wheel and set it turning. Its rhythm seemed to steal into my veins to join my blood. She began to chant softly, words I had never heard before and did not understand. They flowed over and around us, eventually fading into the wind. When we heard them again, they had become the farewell blessing of the hidden. She handed us a bowl and told us to drink from the pool before we left. A thin layer of ice was already forming on the surface, and the water was so cold it bit into my teeth. Joanne wasted no time, but led me quickly away, glancing anxiously towards the north. Before we went back over the crest, I took one last look at the holy woman. She sat motionless. From this distance, she seemed like part of the rock. I could not believe she would stay out here, alone, all night. "How does she survive?" I questioned Joanne. "She'll die of cold." He frowned. "She is sustained by God. It does not matter to her if she dies." "She is like you, then?" "She is a holy person. Once I thought she was an angel, but she is a human being, transformed by the power of God." He did not want to talk more. He seemed to have caught my urgency. We descended at a rapid pace until we came to a small rock fall, which we clambered over. Oh, rockfall, okay. On the other side was a narrow path, made by men walking single file into the dark forest. Once on the path, we began to climb again. Fallen leaves and pine needles muffled our footsteps. Beneath the trees, it was almost night. Joanne went faster still. The pace warmed me a little, but my feet and legs seemed to be slowly turning to stone, as if the limy water I'd drunk were calcifying me. And my heart was chilled too by the old woman's baffling words, and all that they implied for my future. I had never fought in a battle. Was I really to wage 5 of them? If bloodshed was the price of peace, in 5 battles it would be a heavy cost indeed. And the idea that my own son, not yet even born, would be the one to kill me filled me with an unbearable sadness. I caught up with Joanne and touched him on the arm. "What does it mean?" "It means what it says," he replied, slowing a little to catch his breath. "Did she say the same words to you earlier?" "The same." "When was it?" "After I died and came back to life. I wanted to live like her, a hermit on the mountain." I thought I might be her servant, her disciple. But she said my work in the world was not yet finished. And she spoke the words about you. You told her who I was, my past life and everything? No, he said patiently. There was no need to tell her, for she already knew. She said I must serve you, because only you will bring peace. Peace, I repeated. Was this what she meant by heaven's desire? I wasn't even sure what the words signified. The very idea of peace seemed like one of the fantasies of the hidden, the stories of the kingdom that my mother would whisper to me at night. Would it ever be possible to stop the clans from fighting? The whole warrior class fought. It was what they were bred and trained and lived for. Apart from their traditions and personal sense of honour, there was the constant need for land to maintain armies to gain more land, the military codes and shifting webs of alliances, the overweening ambition of warlords like Aida Sadamu, and now, more than likely, Arai Daichi. Peace through war? Is there any other way? Joanne replied. There will be battles. 4 to win, 1 to lose. That is why we are preparing now. You noticed the men at the tannery, saw their eyes. Ever since your merciful actions at Yamagata Castle, when you put an end to the sufferings of the tortured hidden, you have been a hero to these people. Then your service to Lord Shigeru at Inuyama. Even without the prophecy, they would have been ready to fight for you. Now they know God is with you. She sits in a mountain shrine and uses a prayer wheel, I said. Yet she blessed us after the fashion of your people. Our people, he corrected me. I shook my head. I no longer follow those teachings. I have killed many times. Do you really believe she speaks the words of your God? For the hidden teach that the secret God is the only true one, and the spirits that everyone else worships are delusions. I don't know why God tells me to listen to her, he admitted, but he does, and so I do. He is mad, I thought. The torture and the fear have driven him out of his mind. She said, it is all one, but you don't believe that, surely? He whispered, I believe all the teachings of the secret one. I have followed them since childhood. I know them to be true. But it seems to me there is a place beyond the teachings, a place beyond words, where that could be the truth, where all the beliefs are seen to issue from the one source. My brother was a priest. He would have said this was heresy. I have not been to this place yet, but it is where she dwells. I was silent, thinking about how his words applied to myself. I could feel the 3 elements that made up my nature coiled within me like 3 separate snakes, each one deadly to the others if it were allowed to strike. I could never live one life without denying 2/3 of myself. My only way was to go forwards, to transcend the divisions and find a means of uniting them. And you also, Joanne added, reading my thoughts. It is what I would like to believe, I said finally. But whereas for her, it is a place of deepest spirituality, I am perhaps more practical. To me it just seems to make sense. So you are the one who will bring peace. I did not want to believe this prophecy. It was both far more and far less than I wanted for my own life. But the old woman's words had fallen into my inner being, and I could not get rid of them. The men at the tannery, your men, they won't fight, will they? Some will, Joanne said. Do they know how to? They can be taught, and there are many other things they can do. Building, transport, guiding you over secret paths. Like this one? Yes, the charcoal burners made this one. They can seal the entrances with rock piles. They have ways over the whole mountain. Farmers, outcasts, charcoal burners. None of them was supposed to carry weapons or join in the wars of clans. I wondered how many others were like the farmer I had killed at Matsue, or Joanne. What a waste of their courage and intelligence not to use men like that. If I were to train and arm them, I would have all the men I needed. But would warriors fight alongside them? Or would they just consider me an outcast too? I was occupied with these thoughts when I caught the whiff of burning, and a few moments later heard the distant sound of voices and other noises of human activity. The thud of an axe, the crackle of a fire. Joanne noticed as I swung my head. You hear them already? You hear them already? I nodded, listening, counting how many there were. 4 from the voices, I thought, maybe another who did not speak, but who moved with a distinctive tread. No dogs, which seemed unusual. You know I am half Kikuta from the tribe. I have many of their talents. He couldn't help flinching slightly. These talents seem like witchcraft to the hidden. My own father had renounced all his tribe skills when he had converted to the beliefs of the hidden. He had died because he had taken their vow never to kill again. I know it, Joanne replied. I'll need all of them if I'm to do what you expect of me. The tribe are children of the devil, he muttered, adding quickly as he had once before. But your case is different, Lord. It made me realize the risks he was taking for me, not only from human forces, but from supernatural ones. My tribe blood must have made me as dangerous in his mind as a goblin or a river spirit. I was amazed again at the strength of the convictions that drove him and how completely he had placed himself in my hands. The smell of burning grew stronger. Flecks of ash were settling on our clothes and skin, reminding me ominously of snow. The ground took on a greyish look. The path led into a clearing between the trees where there were several charcoal ovens, banked over with damp soil and turf. Only one still burned, patches of red glowing from its crevices. 3 men were engaged in dismantling the cold ovens and bundling the charcoal. Another knelt by a cooking fire where a kettle hung steaming from a 3-legged stand. 4, yet I still felt there had been 5. I heard a heavy footfall behind me and the involuntary intake of breath that precedes an attack. I pushed Joanne aside and leapt round to face whoever it was trying to ambush us. He was the largest man I had ever seen, arms already stretched out to seize us. One huge hand, one stump. Because of the stump, I hesitated to wound him more. Leaving my image on the path, I slipped behind him and called to him to turn round, holding the knife where he could see the blade clearly, and threatening to cut his throat. Joanne was shouting, "It's me, you blockhead! It's Joanne!" The man by the fire let out a great shout of laughter, and the charcoal burners came running. "Don't hurt him, sir," they called to me. "He doesn't mean any harm. You surprised him, that's all." The giant had lowered his arms and stood with his one hand held out in a gesture of submission. "He's mute," Joanne told me, "but even with one hand, he's as strong as 2 oxen, and he's a hard worker." The charcoal burners were clearly worried I was going to punish one of their greatest assets. They threw themselves at my feet, begging for mercy. I told them to get up and keep their giant under control. I could have killed him. They all got up, said the words of welcome, clapped Joanne on the shoulder, bowed again to me, and made me sit down by the fire. One of them poured tea from the kettle. I had no idea what it was made from. It tasted unlike anything I had ever had before, but it was hot. Joanne took them to one side, and they had a huddled whispered conversation, of which I could hear every word. Joanne told them who I was, which produced gasps and more bowing, and that I had to get to Teriyama as soon as possible. The group argued a little about the safest route and whether to start right away or wait till morning. Then they came back to the fire, sat in a circle, and stared at me, their eyes glowing in their dark faces. They were covered in soot and ash, barely clothed, yet not noticing the cold. They spoke as a group and seemed to think and feel as one. I imagined that here in the forest they followed their own rules, living like wild men, almost like animals. "They've never spoken to a lord before," Joanne said. "One of them wants to know if you are the hero, Yoshitsune, returned from the mainland." I told them that though you wander the mountains like Yoshitsune and are pursued by all men, you will be an even greater hero, for he failed, but you are promised success by God. "Will the Lord allow us to cut wood where we please?" one of the older men asked. "Hello, Kid Monster, how you doing?" Aww. Thank you. It's good to see you. They did not speak to me directly, but addressed all their remarks to Joanne. "There are many parts of the forest where we are no longer allowed to go. If we cut a tree there—" He made a graphic gesture of slicing his own neck. "A head for a tree, a hand for a branch," said another. "Plane? I hope you can't hear that." Or maybe a helicopter. How rude. He reached over to the giant and held up the mutilated arm. The stump had healed over with a puckered, livid scar, traces of grey running back up the limb, where it had been cauterized. Tohan clan officials did this to him a couple of years ago. He didn't understand, but they still took his hand. The giant held it out to me, nodding several times, his face bewildered and sorrowful. I knew the Otori clan also had laws forbidding indiscriminate felling of trees. It was to protect the forests forever, but I did not think they enforced such harsh penalties. I wondered, what was the point of half-crippling a man? Was a human life really worth less than a tree's? Lord Otori will reclaim all these lands, Joanne said. He will rule from sea to sea. He will bring justice. They bowed again, swearing that they would serve me, and I promised I would do all I could for them when that day came. Then they fed us meat, small birds they had caught, and a hare. I ate meat so rarely I could not remember when I had last tasted it, apart from the wrestler's chicken stew. That flesh, however, had been bland compared to the hare. They'd trapped it a week ago, saving it for their final night on the mountain, burying it out of sight of any clan official who might come prying round the camp. It tasted of the earth and of blood. While we ate, they discussed their plans for the following day. They decided that one of them would show me the way to the border. They did not dare cross it themselves, but the way down the mountain to Teriyama was plain enough, they thought. We would leave at first light, and it should take me no more than 12 hours, if the snow held off. The wind had shifted slightly to the north, and it held a threatening rawness. They had already planned to dismantle the last oven that evening, and begin the trek down the mountain the following day. Joanne could help them if he stayed overnight, standing in for the man who would be my guide. They don't object to working with you? I said to Joanne later. I was puzzled by the charcoal burners. They ate meat, so they did not follow the teachings of the Enlightened One. They did not pray over their food in the manner of the hidden, and they accepted the outcast to eat and work alongside, quite unlike the villagers. They are also outcast, he replied. They burn corpses as well as wood, but they are not of the hidden. They worship the spirits of the forest, in particular the god of fire. They believe he will travel down the mountain with them tomorrow and dwell with them all winter, keeping their houses warm. In the spring, they accompany him back to the mountain. Joanne's voice held a note of disapproval. I try to tell them about the secret god, he said, but they say they cannot leave their ancestors' god, for who then would light the fire for their ovens? Maybe it's all one, I said, teasing him a little, for the meat and the warmth that the fire god provided had raised my spirits. He gave me one of his slight smiles, but said no more on the subject. He looked suddenly exhausted. The light was almost gone, and the charcoal burners invited us into their shelter. It was roughly built from branches and covered with hides, which I guessed they had swapped for charcoal with the tanners. We crawled in with them, all huddled together against the cold. My head, closest to the oven, was warm enough, but my back was icy. And when I turned over, I thought my eyelids would freeze shut. I did not sleep much, but lay listening to the deep breathing of the men around me, thinking about my future. I had thought I had placed myself under the death sentence of the tribe, each day hardly expecting to be still alive at nightfall, but the prophetess had given me back my life. My own skills had developed relatively late. Some of the boys I had trained with in Matsue were already showing signs of talent, as young as 8 or 9. How old would my son be? How long would it be before he was skilled enough to confront me? Maybe as much as 16 years. It was nearly my entire lifetime. This bald calculation gave me some bitter hope. Sometimes I believed in the prophecy, and sometimes I did not, and so it has been all my life. Tomorrow I would be at Terayama. I would have Shigeru's records of the tribe. I would hold Jato in my hands again. In the spring I would approach Arai. Armed with my secret information on the tribe, I would seek his support against Shigeru's uncles. For it was obvious to me that my first encounter must be with them. Avenging Shigeru's death and taking up my inheritance would give me what I most needed, a power base in impregnable Hagi. Joanne slept restlessly, twitching and whimpering. I realized he was probably always in pain, yet awake he gave no sign of it. Towards dawn the cold eased a little, and I slept deeply for about an hour, only to wake with a soft, feathery sound filling my ears, the sound I dreaded. I crawled to the entrance of the shelter. In the firelight, I could see the flakes beginning to fall, could hear the tiny hiss as they melted on the embers. I shook Joanne and woke the charcoal burners. "It's snowing!" They leapt up, lit branches for torches, and began to pack up their camp. They had no more desire to be trapped on the mountain than I did. The precious charcoal from the last oven was wrapped in the damp hides off the shelter. They prayed quickly over the embers of the fire and placed them in an iron pot to be carried with them down the mountain. The snow was still fine and powdery, mostly not settling, but melting as soon as it touched the ground. However, as dawn came, we could see that the sky was grey and ominous, the clouds full of more snow to come. The wind was picking up too. When the heavier snow did start to fall, it would be as a blizzard. There was no time to eat, no time even for tea. Once all the charcoal was ready, the men were eager to get away. Joanne dropped to his knees before me, but I raised him up and embraced him. His frame in my arms was as bony and frail as an old man's. "We will meet again in the spring," I said. "I will send word to you at the outcast's bridge." He nodded, suddenly overcome with emotion, as though he could not bear to let me out of his sight. One of the men raised a bundle and placed it across his shoulders. The others were already filing down the slope. Joanne made a clumsy gesture to me, a cross between a farewell and a blessing. Then he turned and, stumbling a little under the weight of the burden, walked away. I watched him for a moment, finding myself repeating under my breath the familiar words the hidden use when they part. "Come, Lord," my guide called to me anxiously, and I turned and followed him up the slope. We climbed for what must have been nearly 3 hours. My guide paused only to bend twigs now and then to mark the path back. The snow stayed the same, light and dry, but the higher we climbed, the more it settled until the ground and trees all had a thin powdering of white. The rapid climb warmed me, but my stomach was growling with hunger. The meat the night before had given it false expectations. It was impossible to guess the hour. The sky was a uniform brownish grey, and the ground was beginning to give off the strange, disorienting light of a snowy landscape. When my guide stopped, we were halfway up the main peak of the mountain range. The path we'd been following now twisted away downwards. I could see the valley below through the veil of falling flakes, the massive branches of the beeches and cedars already turning white. "Can't go any further with you," he said. "Want my advice? You turn back with me now. Blizzard's coming. Best part of a day's walk to the temple, even in fair weather. You go on, you perish in the snow." "It's impossible for me to go back," I replied. "Come a little further with me. I'll pay you well for it." But I could not persuade him, nor did I really want to. He seemed uneasy and lonely without his fellows. I gave him half the coins I had left anyway, and in return he gave me a leg bone from the hare, with a fair bit of meat still attached to it. He described the path I had to take, pointing out the landmarks across the valley as best he could in the dim light. A river ran through it, he told me, not knowing I'd already heard it long before. This marked the fief boundary. There was no bridge, but at one point it was narrow enough to jump across. The pools beneath held water spirits, and the current was swift, so I must be careful not to fall in. Also, as this was the easiest place to cross, sometimes it was patrolled, though he did not think that was likely on such a day as this. Once into the next fief, I was to continue in an easterly direction, descending towards a small shrine. Here the paths forked. I must take the right-hand path, the right-hand lower path. I had to keep going east, otherwise I would find myself climbing the mountain range. The wind was from the northeast now, so I had to keep it against my left shoulder. He touched my shoulder twice to emphasize this, peering into my face with his narrow eyes. "You don't look like a lord," he said, his features twisting in a sort of smile, "but good luck to you anyway." I thanked him and set off down the slope, gnawing the bone as I went, cracking it open with my teeth and sucking out the marrow. The snow became slightly wetter and denser, melting more slowly on my head and clothes. The man was right. I did not look like a lord. My hair, which had not been cut since Yuki had clipped it in the style of an actor, hung shaggy round my ears, and I had not shaved for days. My clothes were soaked and filthy. I certainly did not smell like a lord. I tried to remember when I'd last had a bath, and suddenly recalled the Restless stable, our first night out from Matsue, the vast bathhouse, the conversation I'd overheard between Takeo and Hajime. I wondered where Yuki was now, if she had heard of my defection. I could hardly bear to think about the child. In the light of the prophecy, the idea of my son being kept from me and taught to hate me had become even more painful. I remembered Takeo's taunt. It seemed the Kikuta knew my character better than I knew it myself. The noise of the river grew louder, almost the only sound in the snow-filled landscape. Even the crows were silent. The snow was starting to cap the boulders along the water's edge as I came within sight of it. It fell from the mountain some distance upstream in a waterfall, then spread wide between steep crags tumbling over rocks in a series of rapids before being forced into a narrow channel between two flat outcrops. Ancient, twisted pines clung to the sides of the crags, and the whole landscape, whitened out by the snow, looked as if it were waiting for Seshu to come and paint it. I crouched down behind a boulder where a small pine clung precariously to the thin soil. It was more of a bush than a tree, and it gave me a little shelter. The snow was covering the path, but it was easy enough to see where it led and where to jump across the river. I looked at the crossing for a while, listening intently. The pattern of the water over the rocks was not quite constant. Every now and then a lull appeared, bringing an uncanny silence, as though I were not the only creature listening. It was easy to imagine spirits dwelling beneath the water, stopping and starting the flow, teasing and provoking humans, luring them to the edge. I thought I could even hear them breathing. Then, just as I had isolated the sound, the ripple and babble of the river started up again. It was infuriating. I knew I was wasting time, crouched in a bush, being gradually covered by snow, listening to spirits. But slowly, the conviction grew that there was someone breathing, not all that far from me. Just beyond the narrow crossing, the river dropped another 10 feet or so into a series of deep pools. I caught a sudden movement and realized a heron, almost completely white, was fishing in one of them, oblivious to the snow. It was like a sign, the Otori emblem on the boundary of the Otori fief. Perhaps a message from Shigeru that I had made the right choice at last. The heron was on the same side of the river as I was, working its way along the pool towards me. I wondered what it found to eat in midwinter when frogs and toads were hidden away in the mud. It seemed tranquil and unafraid, certain that nothing threatened it in this lonely place. As I watched it, feeling just as safe, thinking that at any moment I would walk to the river and jump across, something startled it. It swung its long head towards the shore and instantly launched itself into flight. The clack of its wings sounded once above the water, and then it disappeared silently downstream. What had it seen? I strained my eyes, staring at the same spot. The river fell silent for a moment, and I heard breathing. I flared my nostrils, and on the northeasterly wind caught a faint human scent. I could see no one, yet I knew someone was lying there. I knew someone was there, lying invisible in the snow. He was so placed that if I went directly to the crossing, he could easily cut me off. If he could maintain invisibility for as long as he had to be from the tribe, and so might be able to see me as soon as I approached the river. My only hope was to take him by surprise and jump further upstream, where the crossing was wider. There was no point in waiting any longer. I took a deep, silent breath and ran out from the cover of the pine tree and down the slope. I kept to the path as long as I could, not sure of the footing beneath the snow. As I broke away from it towards the river, I looked sideways and saw my enemy rise up out of the snow. He was dressed entirely in white. I felt a moment of relief that he had not been invisible, merely camouflaged. Maybe he was not from the tribe. Maybe he was just a border guard, Then the dark chasm loomed beneath me, and I jumped. The river roared and fell silent, and in the silence I heard something spinning through the air behind me. As I landed, I threw myself to the ground, scrabbling on the icy rock, almost losing my grip. The flying object whistled over my head. If I'd been standing, it would have caught me in the back of the neck. Before me lay the star-shaped hole it made in the snow. Only the tribe use such throwing knives, and they usually use several, one after the other. I rolled, pulled myself to safety, still keeping low, and went invisible at once. I knew I could maintain invisibility until I reached the shelter of the forest, but I did not know if he could see me or not, and I forgot about the tracks I would leave in the snow. Luckily for me, he also slipped as he leapt across the river, and while he looked bigger and heavier than me, and could probably run faster, I had a head start on him. Under the cover of the trees I split myself and sent the image sideways up the slope, while I ran on down the path, knowing that I could not outrun him for long, that my only hope was to ambush him somehow. Ahead, the path curved round a large rocky outcrop. A tree branch hung above it. I ran around the corner, stepped back in my own footprints, and sprang for the branch. I pulled myself up onto it and took out my knife, wishing I had Chateau. The other weapons I carried were those with which I'd been meant to kill Ichiro, garrote and neck spike. But the tribe are hard to kill with their own weapons, just as they are hard to outwit with their own tricks. My best hope was the knife. I stilled my breathing, went invisible, listened to him falter as he saw my second self, then heard him run again. I knew I would only have one chance. I dropped on him from above. My weight unbalanced him, and as he stumbled I found a gap in his neck protection and drove the knife into the main artery of the throat, pulling it crossways through the windpipe as Kenji had taught me. He made a grunt of amazement, one I've often heard from tribe members who don't expect to have to play the part of the victim, and the stumble turned into a fall. I slipped from him. His hands went up to his throat, where the breath was whistling noisily and the blood was spurting. Then he went down for good, on his face, the blood turning the snow red. I went through his clothes and took the rest of the knives and his short sword, which was a particularly fine one. He had a selection of poisons, which I also took, having none of my own at that time. I had no idea who he was. I removed his gloves and looked at his palms, but they did not bear the distinctive straight line of the Kikuta, and as far as I could see, he had no tattoos. I left his body for the crows and the foxes, thinking it would be a welcome winter meal for them, and hurried on as quickly and as silently as possible, fearing he might be one of a band, watching the river, waiting for me. The blood was racing through me. I was warmed by my flight and the brief struggle, and I was deeply, primitively glad it was not me lying dead in the snow. I was slightly alarmed that the tribe had caught up with me so quickly and had known where I would be going. Had Akio's body been discovered and messages sent already by horse from Hagi to Yamagata? Or was Akio still alive? I cursed myself for not taking the time to finish him off. Maybe the encounter should have frightened me more, should have made me realize what it would be like to be hunted by the tribe for the rest of my life. I did realize it but I was enraged that they should try to kill me like a dog in the forest, and cheered by the fact that their first attempt had failed. The tribe might have managed to kill my father, but Kenji himself had said no one would have been able to get near him if he had not taken a vow never to kill again. I knew I had all his talents, maybe even more. I would not let the tribe near me. I would carry on Shigeru's work and break their power. All these thoughts whirled through my mind as I slogged on through the snow. They gave me energy and sharpened my resolve to survive. After I'd finished with the tribe, I turned my rage against the Otori lords, whose treachery seemed even greater to me. Warriors pretended that honor and loyalty were all important to them, yet their deceptions and betrayals were as deep and as self-serving as the tribe's. Shigeru's uncles had sent him to his death and were now trying to dispossess me. They did not know what lay in store for them. If they could have seen me knee-deep in drifts of snow, ill-clad, ill-equipped, with no men, money, or land, they would certainly have lost no sleep over any threat I posed them. I could not stop and rest. I had no alternative but to keep walking until I reached Teriyama, or dropped in my tracks from exhaustion. But every now and then I stepped off the path and listened for any sound of pursuit. I heard nothing except the moan of the wind and the soft hiss of the flakes as they fell, until, late in the day when the light was beginning to fade, I thought I could hear snatches of sound from below. It was the last thing I would have expected to hear out on the mountain, as the forest filled with snow. It sounded like flute music, as lonely as the wind in the pines, as fleeting as the flakes. It sent shivers down my spine, not only from the unusual effect music has on me, but from a deeper fear. I believed I had come too close to the edge of the world and was hearing spirits. I thought of the mountain goblins who lure humans and keep them captive below the ground for thousands of years. I wished I could form the prayers my mother taught me, but my lips were frozen, and anyway, I no longer believed in their power. The music grew louder. I was approaching its source, but I could not stop walking, as though it had enchanted me and was drawing me towards itself. I rounded the corner and saw the path fork. Immediately I remembered what my guide had told me, and indeed, there was the little shrine, just visible, 3 oranges placed before it, glowing bright beneath their caps of snow. Behind the shrine was a small hut with wooden walls and a thatched roof. My fears subsided at once, and I almost laughed aloud. It was no goblin.
Take a fucking sip, babes.
Thank you for that patient in the head. I appreciate that. My fears subsided at once, and I almost laughed aloud. Thank you. It was no goblin I'd heard, but some monk or hermit who had retreated to the mountain to seek enlightenment. Now I could smell smoke. The warmth drew me irresistibly. I could imagine the coals drying my soaked feet, bringing them back from the blocks of ice they'd turned into. I could almost feel the heat on my face. The door of the hut was open to let light in and smoke out. The flute player had neither heard nor seen me. He was lost in the sorrowful, unearthly music. Even before I saw him, I knew who he was. I had heard the same music before, night after night, as I grieved at Shigeru's grave. It was Makoto, the young monk who had comforted me. He sat cross-legged, his eyes closed. He was playing the long bamboo flute, but a smaller transverse flute lay on the cushion beside him. A brazier burned smokily near the entrance. At the back of the hut was a raised sleeping area. A wooden fighting pole leaned against the wall, but no other weapons were visible. I stepped in. Even with the brazier it was only slightly warmer than outside, and said quietly, "Makoto?" He did not open his eyes or stop playing. I said his name again. The music faltered, and he took the flute from his lips. He spoke in a whisper, wearily. "Leave me alone. Stop tormenting me. I'm sorry. I'm sorry." He still did not look up. As he took up the flute again, I knelt before him and touched him on the shoulder. He opened his eyes, looked at me, and, taking me completely by surprise, leapt to his feet, throwing the flute aside. He backed away from me, seized the pole and held it out threateningly. His eyes were filled with suffering, his face gaunt as though he had been fasting. "Stay away from me," he said, his voice low and hoarse. I stood too. "Makoto," I said gently, "it's no enemy. It's me, Otori Takeo." I took a step towards him, and he immediately swung the pole at my shoulder. I saw it coming and deflected it a little, and luckily in the small space he could not swing it hard, or he would have broken my collarbone. As it was, he knocked me to the ground. The shock must have reverberated up to his hands, for he dropped the pole and looked at them in astonishment, and then at me on the floor. "Takeo," he said, "you're real. It's not your ghost?" "Real enough to half knock out," I said, getting up and flexing my arm. Once I was sure nothing was broken, I reached inside my clothes for my knife. I felt safer with it in my hand. "Forgive me," he said. I would never hurt you. It's just that I have seen your apparition so often." He looked as if he would reach out to touch me, then drew back. "I can't believe it's you. What strange fate brings you here at this hour?" "I'm going to Terayama. Twice I've been offered refuge there. Now I need to accept that offer until spring." "I can't believe it's you," he repeated. "You're soaked. You must be freezing." He looked round the tiny hut. "I have so little to offer you." He turned towards the sleeping area, tripped over the pole, and bent to retrieve it. Placing it back against the wall, he took one of the thin hempen quilts from the bed. "Take off your clothes. We'll dry them. Wrap yourself in this." "I must keep going," I said. "I'll just sit by the fire for a while." "You'll never get to Terayama tonight. It'll be dark in an hour, and it's still 5 hours' walk. Spend the night here. We'll go together in the morning." "The blizzard will have closed the path by then," I said. "I want to be snowed in at the temple, not snowed out." "This is the first fall of the year," he replied. "It's heavy on the mountain, but from here downwards it is more sleet than snow." He smiled and quoted the old poem. On nights when, rain mixing in, the snow falls. Unfortunately, I am as poor as the poet and his family. It was one of the first pieces Ichiro had taught me to write, and it brought him to my mind with a piercing clarity. I was beginning to shiver violently. Now I was no longer moving, I was indeed freezing. I began to peel off the wet clothes. Makoto took them and stretched them before the brazier, adding a little wood and blowing up the embers. This looks like blood, he said. Are you hurt? No, someone tried to kill me at the border. This blood is his then? I nodded, not sure how much to tell him, for his safety as well as my own. Is anyone following you? He said. Either following me or lying in wait for me. That's how it will be for the rest of my life. Will you tell me why? He lit a taper from the fire and held it to the wick of an oil lamp. The lamp spluttered reluctantly into life. There's not much oil, he apologized and went to close the outer shutters. Night stretched before us. Can I trust you? I said. The question made him laugh. I have no idea what you've been through since we last met, or what brings you to this place now. And you know nothing about me. If you did, you would not need to ask. I'll tell you everything later. In the meantime, yes, you can trust me. If you trust no one else, trust me. A note of deep emotion had crept into his voice. He turned away. I'll warm some soup, he said. I'm sorry, I have neither wine nor tea. I remembered how he had comforted me in my terrible grief after Shigeru's death. He had reassured me while I was racked by remorse, and had held me until grief had given way to desire, and both had been assuaged. I cannot stay with the tribe, I said. I've left them, and they will pursue me until they execute me. Makoto took a pot from the corner of the room and placed it carefully over the embers. He looked towards me again. They wanted me to find the records Shigeru kept of them, I said. They sent me to Hagi. I was supposed to kill Ichiro, my teacher, and give the records to them. But of course, they weren't there. Makoto smiled, but still said nothing. That is one of the reasons why I have to reach Terayama, because that's where they are. You knew, didn't you? We would have told you if you had not already chosen to go with the tribe, he said, but our duty to Lord Shigeru meant we could not take the risk. He entrusted the records to us, for he knew our temple is one of the few in the 3 countries that has not been infiltrated by tribe members. He poured the soup into a bowl and handed it to me. I only have one bowl. I didn't expect visitors, and the last person I expected was you. Why are you here? I asked him. Are you going to spend the winter here? I didn't voice the thought, but I doubted he would survive. Maybe he didn't want to. I drank a mouthful of soup. It was hot and salty, but that was about all you could say for it. And this seemed to be the only food he had. What had happened to the energetic young man I'd first met at Terayama? What had driven him to this state of resignation, almost despair? I pulled the quilt around me and edged a little closer to the fire. As always, I listened. The wind had strengthened and was whistling through the thatch. Every now and then a gust made the lamp flicker, throwing grotesque shadows onto the opposite wall. The noise of whatever was falling outside was not the soft breath-like touch of snow, but harder and more sleety. Now that the doors were closed, the hut was warming up. My clothes were beginning to steam. I drained the bowl and passed it back to him. He filled it, took a sip, and placed it on the floor. The winter, the rest of my life, whichever turns out to be the longer, he said, looked at me, looked down. It's hard for me to talk to you, Takeo, since so much of it concerns you, but the Enlightened One has seen fit to bring you here, so I have to try. Your presence changes everything. I told you, your apparition has been constantly with me. You visit me at night in dreams. I have been striving to overcome this obsession. He smiled self-mockingly. Since I was a child, I have tried to practice detachment from the world of the senses. My only desire was enlightenment. I craved holiness. I'm not saying I'd never had attachments. You know what it's like when men live together without women. Teriyama is no exception. But I never fell in love with anyone. I never became obsessed as I did with you. Again, the smile curved his lips. I won't go into why. It's not important, and anyway, I'm not sure I even know. However, after Lord Shigeru's death, you were out of your mind with grief. I was moved by your suffering. I wanted to comfort you. You did comfort me, I said in a low voice. For me, it went beyond comfort. I didn't realize it would be so powerful. I loved the way I felt and was grateful for experiencing what I'd never felt before, and I loathed it. It made all my spiritual strivings seem like a hollow sham. I went to our abbot and told him I thought I should leave the temple and return to the world. He suggested I go away for a while to think about my decision. I have a boyhood friend in the West, Mamoru, who had been pleading with me to visit him. You know, I play the flute a little. I was invited to join Mamoru and others in presenting a drama at Sumori. He fell silent. The wind threw a flurry of sleet against the wall. The lamp guttered so violently it almost went out. I had no idea what Makoto was going to say next, but my heart had picked up speed, and I could feel the pulse quickening in my throat. Not with desire, though the memory of desire was there, more a fear of hearing what I did not want to hear. Makoto said, "My friend lives in the household of Lord Fujiwara." I shook my head. I'd never heard of him. He is a nobleman living in exile from the capital. His lands run alongside the Shirakawa. Just to hear her name spoken was like being hit in the belly. "Did you see Lady Shirakawa?" He nodded. "I was told she was dying." My heart was hammering so hard I thought it would leap from my throat. She was gravely ill, but she recovered. Lord Fujiwara's physician saved her life. She's alive! The dim lamp seemed to brighten until the hut was full of light. Keide is alive! He studied my face, his own filled with pain. Yes, and I am profoundly thankful, for if she had died it would have been me who dealt the fatal blow. I was frowning, trying to puzzle out his words. What happened? The Fujiwara household knew her as Lady Otori. It was believed that Lord Shigeru married her secretly at Terayama on the day he came to his brother's grave, the day we met. I had not expected to see her in Lord Fujiwara's house. I had not been told of her marriage. I was completely taken aback when she was introduced to me. I assumed you had married her, that you were there yourself. I blurted out as much. Not only did I reveal to myself the strength and nature of my obsession with you, which I'd fooled myself I was recovering from, I destroyed her pretense in an instant, in the presence of her father. But why would she claim such a thing? Why does any woman claim to be married when she is not? She nearly died because she miscarried a child. I could not speak. Makoto said, her father questioned me about the marriage. I knew it had not taken place at Terayama. I tried to avoid answering him directly, but he had already had his own suspicions, and I had said enough to confirm them. I did not know it then, but his mind was very unstable, and he had often spoken of taking his own life. He slit his belly in her presence, and the shock must have caused the miscarriage. I said, "The child was mine. She should have been my wife. She will be." But as I heard my own words, my betrayal of Keide seemed all the more enormous. Would she ever forgive me? "So I assumed," he said. "But when? What were you thinking of? A woman of her rank and family?" "We were thinking of death. It was the night Shigeru died and Inuyama fell. We did not want to die without..." I was unable to continue. After a few moments, Makoto went on. "I could not live with myself. My passion had led me deeply back into the world of suffering I thought I could escape. I felt I had done irreparable harm to another sentient being, even though only a woman. Come on, dude. But at the same time, some jealous part of me wanted her to die, because I knew that you loved her and that she must have loved you. You see, I am hiding nothing from you. I must tell you the worst about myself. I would be the last to condemn you. My own conduct has been far more cruel in its effects. But you belong to this world, Takeo. You live in the midst of it. I wanted to be different. Even that was revealed to me as the most hideous pride. I returned to Terayama and sought our abbot's permission to retire to this small hut where I would devote my flute playing and any passion that remained in me to serving the Enlightened One, though I no longer even hope for his enlightenment, for I am completely unworthy of it." We all live in the midst of the world, I said. Where else is there to live? As I spoke, I thought I heard Shigeru's voice. Just as the river is always at the door, so is the world always outside. And it is in the world that we have to live. Makoto was staring at me, his face suddenly open, his eyes brighter. Is that the message I am to hear? Is that why you were sent to me? I hardly know the plans for my own life, I replied. How can I fathom yours? But this was one of the first things I learned from Shigeru. It is in the world that we have to live. Then let's take it as a command from him, Makoto said, and I could see the energy beginning to flow back into him. He seemed to have been resigned to death, but now he was coming back to life before my eyes. You intend now to carry out his wishes? Ichiro told me I must take revenge on Shigeru's uncles and claim my inheritance, and so I mean to. But as how to achieve it, I have no idea. And I must marry Lady Shirakawa. That was also Shigeru's desire. Lord Fujiwara wishes to marry her, Makoto said carefully. I wanted to brush this aside. I could not believe Keide would marry anyone else. Her last words to me had been, I will never love anyone but you. And before that, she had said, I am only safe with you. I knew the reputation she had acquired, that any man who touched her died. I had lain with her and lived. I had given her a child. And I had abandoned her. She had nearly died. She had lost our child. Would she ever forgive me? Makoto went on. Fujiwara prefers men to women, but he seems to have become obsessed with Lady Shirakawa. He proposes a marriage in name only to give her his protection. Presumably, he is also not indifferent to her inheritance. Shirakawa is pitifully run down, but there is always Maruyama. When I made no comment, he murmured, He is a collector. She will become one of his possessions. His collection never sees the light of day. It is shown only to a few privileged friends. That cannot happen to her. What other choices does she have? She is lucky not to be completely disgraced, to have survived the deaths of so many men connected with her is shameful enough. But there is also something unnatural about her. They say she had 2 of her father's retainers put to death when they would not serve her. She reads and writes like a man, and apparently she is raising an army to claim Maruyama for herself in the spring. Maybe she will be her own protection, I said. A woman, Makoto replied, scornful. It's impossible. Jesus Christ, Makoto, come on. I felt my heart swell with admiration for Keide. What an ally she would make. If we were to marry, we would hold half the Sesshu territory. Maruyama would give me all the resources I needed to fight the Otori lords. Once they were dealt with, only the former Tohan heartland, which was now Arise, would prevent our lands stretching from sea to sea, as the prophecy promised. Now the snows had begun. Everything had to wait till spring. I was exhausted, yet I burned with impatience I dreaded Kaede making an irrevocable decision before I saw her again. You said you would go with me to the temple? Makoto nodded. We'll leave as soon as it's light. But you would have stayed here all winter if I had not stumbled in on you? I have no illusions, he replied. I would probably have died here. Maybe you have saved my life. We talked until late into the night. At least, he talked, as if the presence of another human being had unlocked weeks of silence. He told me something of his background. He was 4 years older than I was, and had been born into a low-ranking warrior family who had served the Otori until Yagahara, and after that defeat had been forced to transfer their allegiance to the Tohan. He had been brought up as a warrior, but was the 5th son in a large family, which became steadily more impoverished. From an early age, his love of learning and his interest in religion had been encouraged, and when the family began its decline, he had been sent to Terayama. He was 11 years old. His brother, then 13, had also been intended as a novice, but after the first winter he had run away and had not been heard of since. The oldest brother had been killed at Yagahara. Their father died not long after. His 2 sisters were married to Tohan warriors, and he had heard nothing from them for years. His mother still lived on the family farm, such as it was, with his 2 surviving brothers and their families. They hardly considered themselves part of the warrior class anymore. He saw his mother once or twice a year. We talked easily, like old friends, and I remembered how I had longed for such a companion when I was on the road with Takeo. A little older and much better educated than I was, Makoto had a gravity and thoughtfulness that contrasted with my reckless nature. Yet, as I was to find out later, he was both strong and courageous, still a warrior, as well as a monk and a scholar. He went on to tell me about the horror and outrage that swept through Yamagata and Terayama after Shigeru's death. We were armed and prepared for an uprising. Aida had been threatening the destruction of our temple for some time, aware that we were growing richer and more powerful every year. He knew what strong resentment there was about being ceded to the Tohan, and he hoped to nip any rebellion in the bud. You saw how the people regarded Lord Shigeru. Their sense of loss and grief at his death was terrible. I'd never seen anything like it. The riots in the town that the Tohan had feared while he lived erupted with even more violence at the news of his death. There was a spontaneous uprising. Former Otori warriors, townspeople armed with stakes, even farmers with scythes and stones advanced on the castle. We were poised to join the attack when news came of Aida's death and Arai's victory at Inuyama. The Tohan forces fell back, and we began to chase them towards Kushimoto. We met you on the road with Aida's head. By then everyone was beginning to know the story about your rescue of Lord Shigeru, and they began to guess the identity of the one they called the Angel of Yamagata. He sighed and blew on the last of the embers. The lamp had long since gone out. When we returned to Terayama, you did not seem like a hero at all. You were as lost and grief-stricken as anyone I'd ever seen, and still faced with heart-rending decisions. You interested me when we first met, But I thought you strange. Talented, maybe, but weak. Your sense of hearing seemed freakish, like an animal's. Usually I consider myself a good judge of men. I was surprised when you were given an invitation to come back again, and puzzled by Shigeru's confidence in you. I realized you were not what you seemed, saw what courage you must have had, and glimpsed the strength of your emotions. I fell in love with you. As I said, it had never happened to me before. And I said I wasn't going to tell you why, but now I have. After a moment he added, I won't speak of it again. There's no harm, I replied. The opposite, rather. I need friendship more than anything else in this world. Apart from an army? That has to wait until spring. I'll do anything in my power to help you. What about your calling, your search for enlightenment? Your cause is my calling, he said. Why else would the enlightened one bring you here to remind me that we live in the midst of the world? A bond of great strength exists between us, and I see now that I don't have to struggle against it. The fire was almost out. I could no longer see Makoto's face. Beneath the thin quilt I was shivering. I wondered if I could sleep, would ever sleep again, would ever stop listening for the assassin's breath. In a world that seemed almost entirely hostile, Makoto's devotion touched me deeply. I could think of nothing to say. I took his hand and clasped it briefly in thanks. Will you keep watch while I sleep for a couple of hours? Of course I will. Wake me and then you can go. Wake me and then you can sleep before we go. He nodded. I wrapped myself in the second quilt and lay down. The faintest glow came from the fire. I could hear its dying susurration. Susurration? What a word. Outside, the wind had dropped a little. The eaves dripped. Some small creature was rustling in the thatch. An owl hooted and the mouse went still. I drifted into an uneasy sleep and dreamt of children drowning. I plunged again and again into icy black water, but was unable to save them. The cold woke me. Dawn was just beginning to lighten the hut. Makoto sat in the position of meditation. His breathing was so slow I could hardly hear it, yet I knew he was completely alert. I watched him for a few moments. When he opened his eyes, I looked away. You should have woken me. I feel rested. I need very little sleep. He said curiously, Why don't you ever look at me? I might send you to sleep. It's one of the tribe skills I inherited. I should be able to control it, but I've put people to sleep without meaning to, so I don't look them in the eye. You mean there's more than just the hearing? What else? I can make myself invisible for long enough to confuse an opponent or slip past a guard, and I can seem to remain in a place after I've left it, or be in two places at once. We call it using the second self. I watched him without appearing to, as I said this, for I was interested in his reaction. He could not help recoiling slightly. Sounds more like a demon than an angel, he muttered. Can all these people, the tribe, do this? Different people have different skills. I seem to have inherited many more than my share. I knew nothing about the tribe, did not even know they existed until our abbot spoke of you and your connection with them after your visit in the summer. Many think the skills are sorcery, I said. Are they? I don't know, because I don't know how I do them. The skills came to me. I did not seek them, but training enhances them. I suppose like any skills, they can be used for good or evil, he said quietly. Well, the tribe want only to use them for their own purposes, I said, which is why they will not let me live. If you come with me, you'll be in the same danger. Are you prepared for that? He nodded. Yes, I'm prepared. Doesn't it alarm you, though? It would make most men weak with fear. I did not know how to answer. I have often been described as fearless, but that seems too fine a word for a state that is more like invisibility, a gift I was born with. And fearlessness only comes on me from time to time, and then takes energy to maintain. I know fear as well as any man. I didn't want to think about it then. I stood and took up my clothes. They were not really dry, and they felt clammy against my skin as I put them on. I went outside to piss. The air was raw and damp, but the snow had stopped, and what lay on the ground was slushy. There were no footprints around the hut and shrine, save my own, already half covered. The track disappeared downhill. It was passable. The mountain and the forest were silent apart from the wind. Far in the distance I could hear crows, and a little closer some smaller bird piped in a mournful way. I could hear no sound of human existence, no axe on trunk, no temple bell, no village dog. The shrine spring made a low, welling sound. I washed my face and hands in the icy black water and drank deeply. That was all the breakfast we had. Makoto packed his few possessions, tucked the flutes into his belt, and picked up the fighting pole. It was his only weapon. I gave him the short sword I'd taken from my assailant the day before, and he placed it next to the flutes in his belt. As we set out, a few flakes of snow were drifting down, and they continued to fall all morning. The path, however, was not too thickly covered, and Makoto, of course, knew the way well. Every now and then I slipped on an icy patch, or stepped in a hole up to my knees. Soon my clothes were as wet as they'd been the night before. The path was narrow. We went in single file at a fair pace, hardly speaking. Makoto seemed to have no words left, and I was too busy listening. For the breath, the broken stick, the thrum of a bowstring, the whistle of throwing knife. I felt like a wild animal, always in danger, always hunted. The light paled to pearl grey, stayed like that for 3 hours or so, then began to darken. The flakes fell more heavily, beginning to swirl and settle. Around noon, we stopped to drink from a small stream, but as soon as we stopped walking, the cold attacked us, so we did not linger. This is the North River, which flows past the temple, Makoto said. We follow its course all the way. It's less than 2 hours now. It seems so much easier than my journey since I'd left Hagi. I almost began to relax. Teriyama was only 2 hours away. I had a companion. We were going to get to the temple, and I would be safe for the winter. But the babbling of the river drowned out all other sound, and so I had no warning of the men who were waiting for us. There were 2 of them, and they came at us out of the forest like wolves. But they were anticipating one man, me, and Makoto's presence surprised them. They saw what they thought was a harmless monk, and they went for him first, expecting him to run away. He dropped the first man with a blow to the head that must have cracked the skull. The second man had a long sword, which surprised me as the tribe do not usually carry them. I went invisible as he swung at me, came up under his reach, and slashed at his sword hand, trying to disable him. The knife glanced off his glove. I stabbed again and let my image appear at his feet. The second stab went home and blood began to drip from his right wrist as he swung again. My second self faded, and I, still invisible, leapt on him, trying to slash him in the throat, wishing I had Jateau and could fight him properly. He could not see me, but he grabbed at my arms and cried out in horror. I felt myself becoming visible, and he realized it at the same time. He stared into my face as if he saw a ghost, his eyes widening in terror, and then beginning to waver as Makoto struck him from behind, cracking the pole against his neck. No one's buying that. He went down like an ox, taking me down with him. I scrambled out from beneath him, and Makoto... I scrambled out from beneath him and pulled Makoto into the shelter of the rocks, in case there were more of them on the hillside. What I feared most were bowmen who could pick us off from afar. But the forest grew too thickly here to be able to use a bow from any distance. There was no sign of anyone else. Makoto was breathing hard, his eyes bright. I realize now what you meant about your skills. You're pretty skillful yourself, thanks. Who were they? I went to the 2 bodies. The first man was Kikuta. I could tell from his hands, but the second wore the Otori crest under his armor. This one is a warrior, I said, gazing at the heron. That explains the sword. The other is from the tribe, Kikuta. I did not know the man, but we had to be relatives, linked by the lines on our palms. The Otori warrior made me nervous. Had he come from Hagi? What was he doing with one of the tribe's assassins? It seemed to be common knowledge that I was heading for Teriyama. My thoughts flew to Ichiro. I prayed they had not extracted the information from him. Or was it Joanne, or one of the impoverished men I'd feared would betray me? Maybe these men had already been to the temple, and there would be more of them waiting for us there. You completely disappeared, Makoto said. I could only see your prints in the snow. It's extraordinary. He grinned at me, his face transformed. It was hard to believe he was the same person as the despairing flute player of the previous night. It's been a while since I've had a decent fight. It's amazing how a brush with death makes life so beautiful. The snow seemed whiter and the cold more piercing. I was terribly hungry, yearning for the comforts of the senses, a scalding bath, food, wine, a lover's body naked against mine. We went on with renewed energy. We needed it. In the last hour or so the wind increased and the snow began to fall heavily again. I had reason to become even more grateful to Makoto for by the end we were walking blind. Yet he knew the path and never faltered. Since I had last been to the temple, a wooden wall had been erected around the main buildings, and at the gate guards challenged us. Makoto replied, and they welcomed him excitedly. They had been anxious for him, and were relieved he had decided to return. After they had barred the gate again, and we were inside the guard room, they looked searchingly at me, not sure if they knew me or not. Makoto said, "Lord Otori Takeo is seeking refuge here for the winter. Will you inform our abbot that he is here?" One of them hurried away across the courtyard. His figure bowed against the wind, turning white before he reached the cloister. The great roofs of the main halls were already capped with snow, the bare branches of cherry and plum trees heavy with the blossom of winter. The guards beckoned us to sit by the fire. Like Makoto, they were young monks, their weapons bows, spears, and poles. They poured us tea. Nothing had ever tasted quite as good to me. The tea and our clothes steamed together, creating a comforting warmth. I tried to fight it. I did not want to relax yet. "Has anyone come here looking for me?" "Strangers were noticed on the mountain early this morning. They skirted the temple and went on up into the forest. We had no idea they were looking for you. We were a little concerned for Makoto. We thought they might be bandits, but the weather was too bad to send anyone out. Lord Otori has arrived at a good time. The way you came down is already impassable. The temple will be closed now till spring." "It is an honor for us that you have returned," one of them said shyly, as the glances they exchanged told me they had a fair idea of the significance of my appearance. After 10 minutes or so, the monk came, hurrying back. "Our abbot welcomes Lord Otori," he said, "and asks that you will bathe and eat. He would like to speak with you when the evening prayers are finished." Makoto finished his tea, bowed formally to me, and said he must get ready for the evening prayers, as though he had spent the whole day in the temple with the other monks, not slogging through a blizzard and killing 2 men. His manner was cool and formal. I knew beneath it lay the heart of a true friend, but here he was, one of the monks, while I had to relearn how to be a lord. The wind howled around the gables. The snow drifted relentlessly down. I had come in safety to Teriyama. The winter was mine to reshape my life. I was taken to one of the temple guest rooms by the young man who'd brought the abbot's message. In spring and summer these rooms would have been full of visitors and pilgrims, but now they were deserted. Even though the outer shutters were closed against the storm, it was bitterly cold. The wind moaned through the chinks in the wall, and through some of the larger ones snow drifted. The same monk showed me the way to the small bathhouse built above a hot spring. I took off my wet, filthy clothes and scrubbed myself all over. Then I eased my body into the hot water. It was even better than I'd imagined it would be. I thought of the men who had tried to kill me in the last 2 days, and was fiercely glad I was alive. The water steamed and bubbled around me. I felt a rush of gratitude for it, that it should well up out of the mountain, bathe my aching body, and unthaw my frozen limbs. I thought about mountains, which were just as likely to spit out ash and fire, or shake their sides and throw buildings around like kindling, and make men feel as helpless as insects that crawl from burning logs. This mountain could have gripped me and frozen me to death, but instead it had given me this scalding water. My arms were bruised from the warrior's grip, and there was a long, shallow cut on my neck where his sword must have grazed me. My right wrist, which had bothered me on and off ever since Takeo had bent it backwards in Inuyama, tearing the tendons, felt stronger. My body seemed more spare than ever, but otherwise I was in good shape after the journey. And now I was clean too. I heard footsteps in the room beyond, and the monk called out that he had brought dry clothes and some food. I emerged from the water, my skin bright red from the heat, rubbed myself dry on the rags left there for that purpose, and ran back along the boardwalk through the snow to the room. It was empty. The clothes lay on the floor. Clean loincloth, quilted undergarments, silken outer robe, also quilted, and sash. The robe was a dark plum colour, woven with a deeper pattern of purple, the Otori crest in silver on the back. I put it on slowly, relishing the touch of the silk. It had been a long time since I had worn anything of this quality. I wondered why it was at the temple, and who had left it here. Had it been Shigeru's? I felt his presence envelop me. The first thing I would do in the morning would be to visit his grave. He would tell me how to achieve revenge. The smell of the food made me realize how famished I was. The meal was more substantial than anything I'd had for days, and it took me just 2 minutes to devour it. Then, not wanting to lose the heat from the bath, or to fall asleep, I went through some exercises, ending with meditation. Beyond the wind and the snow I could hear the monks chanting from the main hall of the temple. The snowy night, the deserted room with its memories and ghosts, the serene words of the ancient sutras all combined to produce an exquisite, bittersweet sensation. My spine chilled. I wished I could express it, wished I had paid more attention when Ichiro had tried to teach me poetry. I longed to hold the brush in my hand. If I could not express my feelings in words, perhaps I could paint them. "Come back to us," the old priest had said, "when all this is over." Part of me wished I could do that and spend the rest of my days in this tranquil place. But I remembered how even here I had overheard plans of war. The monks were armed and the temple fortified now. It was far from over. Indeed, it was only just begun. Oh my god. I knew it was a long chapter, but okay, nearly there. The chanting came to an end, and I heard the soft pad of feet as the monks filed away to eat. Then sleep for a few hours until the bell roused them at midnight. Footsteps approached the room from the cloister, and the same monk came to the door and slid it open. He bowed to me and said, "Lord Otori, our abbot wishes to see you now." I stood and followed him along the cloister. "What's your name?" "Norio, sir," he replied, and added in a whisper, "I was born in Hagi." He did not say more, the rule of the temple being that no one spoke unnecessarily. We walked around the central courtyard, already filled with snow, past the eating hall, where the monks knelt in silent rows, each with a bowl of food in front of him, past the main hall, which smelled of incense and candle wax, where the golden figure sat gleaming in the dimness, to the third side of the square. Here lay a series of small rooms, used as offices and studies. From the furthest I could hear the click of prayer beads, the whisper of a sutra. We stopped outside the first room, and Norio called in a low voice, "Lord Abbot, your visitor is here." I was ashamed when I saw him, for it was the old priest himself, in the same worn clothes I had seen him when I had last been at Terayama. I had thought him one of the old men of the temple, not its head. I had been so wrapped up in my own concerns I had not even known who he was. I dropped to my knees and touched my forehead to the matting. As informal as ever, he came towards me, told me to sit up, and embraced me. Then he sat back and studied me, his face illuminated by his smile. I smiled back, sensing his genuine pleasure and responding to it. "Lord Artori," he said, "I am very glad you have returned to us safely. You have been much on my mind. You have been through dark times. They are not over, but I seek your hospitality for the winter. I seem to be hunted by everyone, and I need a place of safety while I prepare myself. Makoto has told me a little of your situation. You are always welcome here. I must tell you my purpose right away. I mean to claim my inheritance from the Otori and punish those responsible for Lord Shigeru's death. It may place the temple in some danger." "We are prepared for that," he replied serenely. "You are doing me a great kindness that I don't deserve. I think you will find that those of us who have long-standing connections with the Otori consider ourselves in your debt," he replied. "And of course, we have faith in your future." More than I have, I thought silently. I felt the colour come to my face. It was unthinkable that he should praise me after all the mistakes I had made. I felt like an impostor, dressed in the Otori robe, with my hair cropped, no money, no possessions, no men, no sword. "All endeavours start with a single action," he said, as though he could read my mind. "Your first action was to come here. My teacher Ichiro sent me. He will meet me here in the spring. He advised me to seek Lord Arai's protection. I should have done that from the start." The abbot's eyes crinkled as he smiled. "No, the tribe would not have let you live. You were far more vulnerable then. You did not know your enemy. Now you have some inkling of their power." "How much do you know about them?" "Shigeru confided in me and sought my advice often. On his last visit, we spoke at length about you." "I didn't hear that." "No, he was careful to speak by the waterfall. So you would not hear. Later we moved into this room, where you spoke of war. He needed my assurance that the temple and the town would rise once Aida was dead. He was still in two minds about the assassination attempt, fearing he would simply be sending you to certain death. Damn it. Where was I? As it turned out, it was his own death that sparked the uprising, and we could not have prevented it, even if we had wanted to. However, Arai was in alliance with Shigeru, not with the Otori clan. If he can take this territory for himself, he will. They will be at war by the summer. He was silent for a moment, then went on. The Otori intend to claim Shigeru's land and declare your adoption illegal. Not content with conspiring in his death, they insult his memory. That's why I'm glad you intend to take up your inheritance. Will the Otori ever accept me, though? I held my hands palm upwards. I am marked as Kikuta. We'll talk about that later. You'll be surprised how many are awaiting your return. You'll see in the spring. Your men will find you. An Otori warrior already tried to kill me, I said, unconvinced. Makoto told me. The clan will be split, but Shigeru knew this and accepted it. The rift was not of his making. The seeds were sown when he was usurped after his father's death. I hold Shigeru's uncles responsible for his death, I said, but the more I learn, the more it surprises me that they let him live so long. Fate decrees the length of all our lives, he replied. The Otori lords fear their own people. Their farmers are volatile by nature and tradition. They have never been completely cowed like the peasants under the Tohan. Shigeru knew them and respected them, and in turn won their respect and affection. That protected him against his uncles. Their loyalty will be transferred to you. Maybe, I said, but there is a more serious problem. I am now sentenced to death by the tribe. His face was calm, ivory-coloured in the lamplight. Which I imagine is another reason you are here. I thought he would go on, but he fell silent. He was watching me with an expectant look on his face. Lord Shigeru kept records, I said, speaking carefully into the hushed room. Records of the tribe and their activities. I'm hoping you'll make them available to me. They have been kept here for you, he replied. I will send for them now. And of course there is something else I have been keeping for you. Chateau, I said. He nodded. You are going to need it. He called to Norio and asked him to go to the storehouse and fetch the chest and the sword. Shigeru did not want to influence any decision you might make, he said as I listened to Norio's footsteps echoing away around the cloister. He was aware that your inheritance would cause divisions in your loyalty. He was quite prepared for you to choose your Kikuta side. In that case, no one would ever have access to the records except myself. But since you have chosen your Otori side, the records are yours. I have bought myself a few months of life, I said, with a trace of self-contempt. There's no nobility in my choice unless it is that I am finally doing what Lord Shigeru wanted. It's hardly even a choice, since my life with the tribe was approaching an end. As for my Otori side, It is only by adoption and will be questioned by everyone. Again the smile lit his face, his eyes bright with understanding and wisdom. Shigeru's will is as good a reason as any. I felt he had some other knowledge that he would share with me later, but even as that thought came, I heard footsteps returning. I could not help tensing before I recognized them as Norio's, slightly heavier this time. He was carrying the chest and the sword. He slid open the door and stepped inside, dropping to his knees. He placed the chest and the sword on the matting. I did not turn my head, but I heard the soft sound they made. My pulse quickened with a mixture of joy and fear at the prospect of holding Jato again. Norio closed the door behind him and, kneeling again, placed the precious objects in front of the abbot, where I too could see them. They were both wrapped in pieces of old cloth, their power disguised. The abbot took Jato from its covering and held it out towards me in both hands. I took it in the same fashion, raised it above my head, and bowed to him, feeling the cool, familiar weight of the scabbard. I longed to draw the sword and wake its steel song, but I would not do so in the presence of the abbot. I placed it reverently on the floor next to me while he unwrapped the chest. A smell of rue rose from it. I recognized it at once. It was indeed the one I had carried under Kenji's eyes up the mountain path, thinking it some gift for the temple. Had Kenji no idea then of what it contained? The old man opened the lid. It was not locked, and the smell of rue intensified. He lifted one of the scrolls and held it out to me. You were to read this one first. That was Shigeru's instruction to me. As I took it, he said with sudden, profound emotion, I did not think this moment would come. I looked into his eyes. Deep set in his old face, they were as bright and lively as a 20-year-old's. He held my gaze, and I knew he would never succumb to the Kikuta sleep. In the distance, one of the smaller bells rang 3 times. In my mind's eye, I could see the monks at prayer in meditation. I felt the spiritual power of this holy place, concentrated and reflected in the person of the old man before me now. Again I felt a rush of gratitude to him, to the belief that sustained him, to heaven, and to the different gods who, despite my own disbelief, seemed to have taken my life into their charge and care. Read it, he prompted me. The rest you can study later, but read this one now. I unrolled the scroll, frowning at the script. I recognized Shigeru's hand, and I knew the characters, my own name among them, but the words made no sense to me. My eyes darted up and down the columns. I unrolled a little more and found myself in a sea of names. It seemed to be a genealogy like the ones Gosaburo had explained to me in Matsue. Once I'd grasped that, I began to work it out. I went back to the introductory writing and read it again carefully. Then I read it a 3rd time. I looked up at the abbot. Is it true? He chuckled softly. It seems it is. You do not see your own face, so you don't see the proof there. Your hands may be Kikuta, but your features are all Otori. Your father's mother worked as a spy for the tribe. She was employed by the Tohan and sent to Hagi when Shigeru's father, Shigemori, was hardly more than a boy. A liaison occurred, apparently not one sanctioned by the tribe. Your father was the result. Your grandmother must have been a woman of some ingenuity. She told no one. She was married to one of her cousins, and the child was brought up as Kikuta. Shigeru and my father were brothers? He was my uncle. It would be hard for anyone to deny it, given the way you look. When Shigeru first set eyes on you, he was struck by your resemblance to his younger brother, Takeshi. Of course, the two brothers were very alike. Now, if your hair were longer, you would be the image of Shigeru as a young man. How did he discover this? Some of it from his own family records. His father had always suspected that the woman had conceived a child and confided this to him before he died. The rest Shigeru worked out for himself. He traced your father to Mino and realized a son had been born after his death. Your father must have suffered some of the same conflict as you. Despite being raised as Kikuta and despite his skills, high even by the standards of the tribe, he still tried to escape from them. In itself, this suggests that his blood was mixed and that he lacked the fanaticism of the true tribe. Shigeru had been compiling his records of the tribe since he first became acquainted with Muto Kenji. They met at Yegahara. Kenji was caught up in the fighting and witnessed Shigemori's death. He glanced down at Yato. He retrieved this sword and gave it to Shigeru. They may have told you the story. Kenji once alluded to it, I said. Kenji helped Shigeru escape from Aida's soldiers. They were both young men then. They became friends. Apart from the friendship, they were useful to each other. Over the years they exchanged information about many things. Sometimes, it must be said, unwittingly. I don't believe even Kenji realized how secretive, even devious, Lord Shigeru could be. I was silent. The revelation had astonished me, yet, on reflection, it made perfect sense. It had been my Otori blood that had been so eager to learn the lessons of revenge when my family were massacred at Mino. That same blood that had formed the bond with Shigeru. I grieved for him anew, wished I had known earlier, yet rejoiced that he and I shared the same lineage, that I truly belonged to the Otori. This confirms that I have made the right choice, I said finally, in a voice choked by emotion. But if I am to be one of the Otori, a warrior, I have so much to learn. I gestured at the scrolls in the chest. Even my reading is poor. You have the whole winter ahead of you, the abbot replied. Makoto will help you with reading and writing. In the spring, you should go to Arai to learn the practice of war. In the meantime, you must study its theory and keep up your training with the sword. He paused and smiled again. I could tell he had another of his surprises in store for me. I shall teach you, he said. Before I was called to the service of the Enlightened One, I was considered something of an expert in these matters. My name in the world was Matsuda Shingen. Even I had heard this name. Matsuda was one of the most illustrious Otori warriors of the previous generation, a hero to the young men of Hagi. The abbot chuckled as he read the astonishment on my face. I think we will enjoy the winter. Plenty of exercise to keep us warm. Take your possessions, Lord Otori. We will begin in the morning. When you are not studying, you will join the monks in meditation. Makoto will rouse you at the hour of the tiger. I bowed before him, overwhelmed by gratitude. He waved me away. We are just repaying our debt to you. No, I said, I am forever in your debt. I will do anything you tell me. I am completely at your service. I was at the door when he called out, Maybe there is one thing. Turning, I fell to my knees. Anything. Grow your hair, he said, laughing. I could still hear him chuckling as I followed Norio back to the guest room. He was carrying the chest for me, but I held Jato. The wind had dropped a little. The snow had grown wetter and heavier. It dulled sound, blanketing the mountain, shutting off the temple from the world. In the room, the bedding had already been laid out. I thanked Norio and bade him good night. 2 lamps lit the room. I drew Jato from its scabbard and gazed on the blade, thinking of the fire that had forged it into this combination of delicacy, strength, and lethal sharpness. The folds in the steel gave it a beautiful, wave-like pattern. It was Shigeru's gift to me, along with my name and my life. I held the sword in both hands and went through the ancient movements he had taught me in Hagi. Jato sang to me of blood and war. End of chapter 7. Oh boy, that was